A way for the reflective practitioner to generate new knowledge is through the scientific method. The scientific method has proved essential in terms of innovation and knowledge building through history. And essentially it's based on identifying certain hypotheses and trying to experiment in order to see whether these hypotheses stand up to experiment or fail in terms of the experiment. And we can look at the scientific method from a nice simple cyclical design where the reflective practitioner is abstracting thinking, designing the concepts, and then experimenting on these concepts. For the reflective practitioner, for the teacher, this is looking at issues and then experimenting to overcome those issues. From that experimentation, we look at the results and we evaluate the effectiveness of the experimentation and then refer the evaluation back to the hypothesis. Is our hypothesis correct or is it false? If it's false, then we need to re-hypothesize, in other words, redesign our approach in order to experiment again and refine our thinking about the issue. And it's this cyclical process which is very useful for the reflective practitioner, although, of course, it can be argued that teaching is not a scientific process. But the scientific method is very useful in providing a structure for experimentation, where experimentation can be seen as a trial and error process. The scientific method gives experimentation a much more scientific structure and a much more valued structure in terms of the profession as a whole. And what plays an important part in the scientific method is the evaluation, and what we bring to that is essentially statistical analysis of the information that we're gathering. The analysis phase is very much about looking at the variables which we set in the hypothesis and then seeing if we can verify those variables, seeing if they stand up to scrutiny, and looking at this within the whole context of teaching. And the data results that come from this, from observation of reality, is very much not about changing our experience, but trying to be reflective about the experience without any change taking place. And statistical analysis from this scientific method perspective for the reflective practitioner is very much about making it possible to experiment in the classroom, to make that experimentation the object of the research. And what we have to remember, that statistical analysis is quite key when we're dealing with human beings, simply because we're working with variables constantly rather than fixed items that we can catalogue.